Well, this week, unusually, it's a plug for a book. And we've got the author of the book. The book is called Why We're Getting Poorer. It's just about to be published, or has been published by HarperCollins. We'll get the facts right on there in just a second. Cahal Moran is the guy who wrote it, who's also a video streamer, doing rather better than we are on this podcast on YouTube at the moment. So, we'll ask him how he's managed that success. Steve doing a lot better with his videos, though, I have to say. Steve, you've got thousands and thousands on your own channel. We'll get there.
Let's hope so, yeah.
Before we start today, though, you and I have been promising... persistence is all it takes, by the way. If you want to get on this podcast...
Just nag. Yeah,
just persistence.
We're both susceptible to nagging. Yeah. Old middle-aged man.
10 or 20 times, you're on. But FeedSpot have listed us as one of the top podcasts in Britain and in the world, actually, possibly in the universe.
I was about to say, yeah.
So in the UK, we are number 3, which is good. I'm not quite sure what criteria they've used, but they've asked us to give a plug. It's one of those things, we'll made you number 3. Please plug FeedSpot, which is what we're number 3 in. Otherwise, I don't know. What happens if we don't? Do we suddenly become number 20? It's like these are the number 3 most obliging podcast. Anyway, there, which sounds great until you look at the global one, and we are in the top 10 or top 20 or something, but we're beaten by the European Central Bank podcast.
Yes.
So, yeah. So anyway, we've got to... So look, here we are now, FeedSpot. We've done it. Just bump us up to why aren't we number 1 is the question.
Okay.
If it's based... I mean, they've obviously got some sort of criteria, but, quality rather than just the numbers. There's got to be some sort of ability to maneuver it that way. Anyway, let's talk to Cahal Moran. His book is called Why We Are Getting Poorer. So is it out yet, Cahal? First question.
It is out. It's been out for about a month, yeah.
Right. Is it going all right?
Yeah, it seems to be going pretty well. Yeah. I think it's sold a fair few copies, and I suppose that's all I can ask.
Yeah, for sure. Well, no one's ever going to get rich publishing books, are they? I mean, the one thing you realise.
Fantasy will get...
I mean, it's semi-autobiographical.
Right, a J.K. Rowling's or maybe a macroeconomic textbook. Fantasy wins.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, the ECB podcast doing better than I think I've already mentioned that. Yeah. So Cahal, your background, first of all. So you are an economics graduate. You started video streaming like a lot of people during the pandemic, but it worked for you, not for everybody.
Yeah, I'd been getting into YouTube because it seemed that there was some serious videos. Because when I was growing up, it was just cats and music videos. But then I just gradually became aware that people were actually making video essays and having like interesting and serious conversations. But the thing is, there wasn't much economics. And I think that's for obvious reasons, right? Because most of the videos on YouTube are about films or like computer games, because that's much more watchable and amenable to the format. But I did think there was a niche, and I decided to try and fill it. And I think there was obviously some demand for it because it went well enough for it to now be my full-time job.
Oh, great. Well, there we are. And, the whole point of the book is that we are in a situation now where, people are feeling as though they are worse off. Well, obviously not the very rich. The question is how much of the very rich are making the rest of us feel that much poorer. And there used to be, and Steve, I mean, let's start with you. And we will talk around the book, but we'll talk generally as well. I mean, there is this belief, isn't there, that why should we worry about the rich getting richer? Because that's not stopping the poor getting wealthier as well. The whole trickle-down argument. That there's no pie. It's not a case of taking a slice of the pie, which is to an extent true, but not wholly true, is it? I mean, there's absolutely no doubt. The wealthy are getting wealthier at the expense of the middle class and the poor.
The basic line of conventional economics has always been don't worry about the distribution, because the distribution is made by the market and it must be fair, because, it's quite a simple assumption to assume perfect competition everywhere. And with perfect competition, no monopolies, everybody competes against everybody else. You get your marginal product, so you get paid what you deserve. That takes care of income distribution. It's a case of raising the actual level that matters. And the slight problem with that argument is the theory that people receive their marginal product is complete and utter rubbish. But it's pumped into people's minds by doing economics 101. But that's the large reason why they say don't worry about it. Now, when you look at from a more complex systems dynamics point of view, it incredibly does matter what the distribution of income is. and it's become much more unfair.
So you're not getting what you contribute. You're getting a portion of that, and the rest of that is going to people like Elon Musk, who are making themselves disproportionately wealthy and having a disproportionate influence in his case.
My position is that where all the wealth comes from is exploiting free energy. The energy fossil fuel energy is the foundation of the incredible rise in the wealth per capita of the entire population. So when it is a question of who gets most of that benefit of the free energy, and the income distribution, the wage systems, levels of private debt, etc., have all pushed it towards the wealthy.
So, Cahal, in the book, you talk about austerity. And things definitely got worse, didn't they, in the UK during those years of austerity? Do you think that brought this more to the fore? That this is something which we've been seeing long term, but it got aggravated by austerity? Is that the point you were trying to make?
Yeah, I think it's definitely semi-autobiographical, right? Because I turned 16 just as the 2008 financial crisis got started, and since then it's been one thing after another. Our response to that, as you said, was austerity, and I just don't feel like I've ever lived in a good economy where things have been improving consistently for the average person, and it's been like 17 years since that first hit. So it's a really long time, and austerity in particular has just led to stagnant real wages, growth being lower than it should have been. It's led to a hollowing out of our physical and social infrastructure. And I think a lot of people can see that. A lot of people are feeling it. And that the book was really just an attempt to kind of capture what exactly is going on and why and how we can change it.
Yeah, but you young people, it's because the reason why you're struggling is because you're not saving. You know what it is? It is your avocado on toast.
That's the avocado toast ruling of the...
How often are you having avocado on toast, Cahal? I mean, that's why you can't afford a house. Add all of those avocado on toast together.
House.
You got your deposit right there.
Yeah. At least 3 times a day. Yeah. I need to get my act together, clearly.
But that is an argument that's often used, isn't it? And also that, what are people complaining about? We've still got a very good standard of living, and, you could argue, well, go back to the 1960s when I was growing up, and the 70s, the standard of living wasn't anywhere near what it is today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the real question to ask is why, despite some of these gains, does it seem that so many people are struggling to get by? And I think what we have now is a situation where, look, I live in London. I can order Brazilian Korean fusion to my door, in like half an hour, right? It's absolutely absurd. That standard of living in terms of consumer goods and amenities, avocado toast, whatever, is very high, and it is really cool, as is the technology that we are using to have this conversation. That wasn't available in the past either. But the thing is, getting your foot on the housing ladder, things like education, fees have been introduced there in the UK. They've gone up elsewhere as well. The availability and quality of public services, your ability to raise a family, childcare and things like that. These are the things that have just seemed to have become prohibitively expensive, or in some cases not really available. And I think although it's very nice to have Brazilian Korean fusion delivered to your door, I don't think it matters to people fundamentally as much as having a house, having a family and so on.
So Steve, I wonder whether we're doing up the back of our house, as regular listeners to this podcast will know. We're at the stage. We're still at the stage now where we're going, I don't know, is it worth it? Because we're starting to get builders' quotes in. I tell you, builders' quotes, since we started looking at this, which would be shortly after the pandemic, the cost of materials and the cost of labour has more than doubled. And you can't, and I see builders with very nice houses, which is fair enough. Why shouldn't they, I guess? But I mean, the market for, they are obviously looking and thinking, well, if we add value to your house and we're adding, so I don't know, it costs you 150,000 and we add 250,000 to the value of your house, why shouldn't we be charging you 220,000? So you add, so we take most of the wealth that is being generated. Why should we do all the work for you to get the benefits? And so I wonder whether that's sort of like the case of, they're doing the right thing and claiming what their marginal contribution is. Is that why we're starting to see things getting more expensive? Perhaps because people are getting wise to this.
I think I'd blame the banks before I'd blame the builders. And
For giving the loan to me to pay them that
well,
much.
the thing, we've turned all these things into speculative assets. Okay? And that's the real danger. And what's the price of a speculative asset? It's the amount of leveraged you're willing to take up on the money you're willing to gamble on that thing rising in price in future. And when you look at the increase in the price of housing globally since the 1970s, I think the UK actually, congratulations, the UK is number one at something, house price inflation. Not from when you look at the index that the Bank of International Settlements publishes, it's used as 2010, so it's not obvious then. But if you take it right back to the earlier states, England's had the most incredible increase in house prices, and the reason is the deregulation of lending to houses that Maggie Thatcher brought back in '82. That's what set the whole thing off. Now it means you can't afford to buy the house, but I'm sure that's the predominant thing. Assets are out of reach, whereas back in the '50s, assets were reachable by a one-income family, and I'm speaking my own parents' experience there. Our house was paid for by my father's salary, wife and 5 kids, but one salary could do it. These days, two wife and husband and 1 kid, and people are struck.
2 wives and a husband, did you say? What kind of house are you running there, Steve? A wife and a husband and 2 kids.
Yeah. Oh, well, I won't. There's a Woody Allen line about that I could use right now.
But the point you're trying to make is that yes, you take that combined. It used to be what 3.5 times the single income.
Now it's about 10 times the joint income.
Yeah, exactly. Which is crazy, isn't it? But that's just one factor. Cahal, is that the key factor though? Does so much of this feeling of, you're not, it's called the wealth effect, isn't it? The moment you've got a house, you supposedly feel the wealth effect. You feel that much better off, whether you're spending the money or not, or whether you are ground down by an excessive mortgage. You still have the wealth effect in that you see this asset that's going up in value. Do you think that's the crux of the issue for younger people, that they're not feeling that wealth effect because they're not getting on the housing ladder? Or is it more than that?
Yeah, look, there's 101 different issues, right, that young people are facing. But I completely agree with Steve about housing and how it's been used as a speculative asset. And I think he's kind of understating his case, because I think it's really so central to our economies. And to, you were talking about the wealth effect, and you can remortgage and you can buy things that consumer goods, consumer durables and things like that. I think housing is also used as a pension increasingly by a lot of people. It's most people's only asset. And you have all this along with the withdrawal of social housing, right? Which is another big factor. In Anglo countries especially, we've just replaced an actual social safety net, whether through housing or through other things, just with this one speculative asset. And it's in everyone's interests to, it's in a lot of people's interests to keep the price increasing. And then that obviously affects young people who can't buy, or people who are too poor to buy.
So you talk about, you refer to Germany a few times in the book, but you're referring to Germany in relation to how there's more democratization of the workplace, I guess. In that, they do have workers sitting on the boards of companies.
Exactly.
So he's a very capitalist nation that actually has almost cooperatives in the way that they operate. But you don't talk about it in relation, or I don't think you talk about it in relation to housing. And yet there, a lot of housing is rented, and that's been accepted in Germany for a long time.
It's really interesting, the case of Germany, because they have, instead of pursuing that model that Steve and I just spoke about, they've chosen to pursue more of a private rented model and home ownership, in the sense that we would think of it, having a mortgage. You can debate whether that's really owning your house, but having a mortgage and owning it privately is rarer. Instead, a lot of people do tend to have very secure rented houses, and they're secured against increases to their rent. They're secured against unfair evictions. They have a lot of rights, and many people in Germany just report that they have no intention of buying a house for that reason, because they're probably as secure. In some cases, you might argue that they're more secure than somebody with a mortgage in the UK.
So are we obsessed with buying then? Is the answer that we just say, well, let's have a more regulated environment like they do in Germany, and not, and that presumably, Steve, that would stop the if the regulation is correct, that would stop the asset bubble, wouldn't it?
It's one
in
of
its
the many
tracks.
things that does that. Equally, like Singapore's provision of public housing, same sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, in fact, the most successful capitalist nations are the ones with the most socialist housing policies. And the reason is it just takes that particular burden off the working class. Yes, you've got to have a roof over your head. Now go to work. Now, I mean, in the UK, the fear is, and particularly in America as well, I've seen this brutally in New York over time, homelessness is just around the corner. And that level of insecurity, I think that alone, it isn't just that the income share hasn't gone up. And I presume that's part of what you cover in the book too, Cahal, the flatlining of real incomes from the mid-70s for the working class, particularly in America. But it's just out of reach. The insecurity is in some ways worse than the cost.
And you mentioned the S word there, socialism. And is that part of the answer? Well, it's seen as a problem by a lot of people, isn't it? Particularly, the bond vigilantes. So every time the government tries to borrow more money, the bond vigilantes will kick in, and we'll see the value of bonds decline. We'll see interest rates of the cost of borrowing start to shoot up, as though they are controlling. We saw it with whether Liz Truss was right or not. We saw it with Liz Truss. We're starting to see it again with happening in America with Donald Trump. So are we, and I think that's a point you're trying to make, are we too controlled by the markets, which obviously is the people with wealth buying and selling and determining the direction that economies take?
I mean, there are two things to say about this. One is that both Liz Truss and Donald Trump are completely incompetent in their own way, and I wouldn't say that any of what they're doing I would call socialism, right? Like, I mean, you could argue tariffs are kind of socialism in that they're a government intervention, but I don't think Trump's moving towards that. So I do think that their policies in particular were really, really poorly thought
so
through.
Thank God the markets kicked in. But say you had say you had somebody else trying to do the right thing. If Liz Truss had said, well, we're going to borrow more because we need to see more investment. We also need to ramp up the NHS, and we need to provide investment in industries that we see as being potential growth that are going to be high employment industries. And everyone would be going, fantastic idea. But the bond vigilantes may still kick in and say, don't care what you're doing. You're still going to be borrowing more. And they'd stop her in the tracks.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that there are other ways of funding. There are other ways of funding government deficits, right? And I think it depends on which country you are. But in the UK, the Bank of England does have the ability to fund spending, especially for investment. This leads to back to the MMT debate, which everything seems to. But this is what they've been doing for a long time since the crisis. The Bank of England actually did step in during the Liz Truss crisis, and that's what stabilised things. We completely have that ability to do things. So, I mean, whether or not markets react badly, I don't think we should feel enthralled to them, especially in the UK. I do appreciate the situation's a little bit different if you're a Latin American country.
But what do you reckon, Steve? Are we too responsive? Are the markets driving the economy too much?
This is like on MMTs, I think it's 100% correct about how government finances work. And the restraint on trying to restrain the deficit, which actually reduces the amount of fiat money creation. I think that's one of the triggers that led to the level of instability and inequality we see these days. So that's But actually, Carl, I'd like to get your full. Give us the 5-minute elevator pitch when we continue later. But the pitch of your argument, because much of mine comes back to the role of private debt and to governments not creating enough money through not running sustained deficits.
Yeah, because I mean, there is the question. You can do that now. You can do the pitch now, Carl.
Before the break,
set it up
okay.
And before the break, and but make it 3 minutes, not 5. But I mean, because the fundamental question I think is, when we go back 20 years. All the services that we needed were provided. Now we see a crumbling NHS. We don't see enough investment in education. Students are having to pay for their own tertiary education. Whereas in our day it was all free plus some more to spend. Drinking money was all provided as well. Why have things become the way they are? And is it because government money isn't available? And if so, why not? Because it's got a bigger population. You would have thought more tax if they were, looking at it that way. What's changed?
I take a slightly different angle, although I do tend to agree with your analysis, Steve, from a macroeconomic standpoint, from an accounting standpoint. You're absolutely right that the government needs to run deficits. But what I think about, and this relates strongly to austerity, is this argument that we've had for a long time across the world, but especially in the UK. There seems to be this notion that the economy and society are kind of necessarily opposed, and we have to kind of cut down health, education, housing, whatever, to kind of appease the economy, and that will lead to the private sector filling the gap and so on. And I just think the opposite is true. You were talking about housing, Steve. You know, is it good for working class people to have a roof over their head and be secure in it?
Thing.
Yes, of course it is.
Got to keep them in their place.
They'll work harder. They'll work, yeah.
Keep warm by
Exactly.
wash themselves in the oil dripping off the machine.
This is exactly it, right? I mean, and it's there's a lot of evidence for this if you want like sophisticated studies and stuff, but it's also as plain as the nose on my face that a healthy, well-educated, housed, well-fed workforce with good childcare and all the rest of it, that is going to be a sound basis for a thriving economy. We've got it completely backwards in the UK, and they keep cutting things like this and then wondering why growth is low, wondering why society is falling apart, and wondering why they miss their targets on the deficit as well, why they don't reduce the deficit, because it doesn't work. You need a strong society as a foundation for a strong economy, and this is something that places like Germany understand, and the Scandinavian countries even more so. And
yet they would say, well, we want low tax and we don't have the money to do all this sort of stuff. I mean, we hear that again and again, which gets back to whether it's right or not, the markets are being given the reason why that spending is not happening.
And again,
we're saying it's the response of the investors.
We've got Ptolemaic economists trying to do a moonshot.
Well, another chapter in the book is why have we got so many billionaires, and is that a problem? Yes. So we'll look at that when we come back. Cahal Moran is joining us today. He's got a new book out. It's called Why We Are Getting Poorer. And hands up those people who don't feel as though they're getting poorer. We all feel it, don't we? Or at least things have flatlined. So we'll get more from Cahal when we come back on the Debunking Economics podcast. So, Cahal, welcome back. There's a section in your book talking about billionaires that we have got more than ever. Why is that? And is it a bad thing necessarily? I mean, the counter argument, I'm sure you're going to say yes, it is. The counter argument is that, the more billionaires means that there's more people out there creating successful businesses, which we all benefit from. Some of these things I say, by the way, I am being the devil's advocate. I think what a load of shit. But
I know.
But
anyway,
you've ruined our mailbox for the day, Phil. Half our mailbox people complaining
just
about
before they all
right,
flooded in. I thought I'd better
there,
point that out. But I'm partially asking the question though: is it a problem if we have billionaires? I mean, you've got to have some people who are successful.
Unlike most people with my politics and economics, I'm sometimes thankful for the existence of Elon Musk, because he does seem to serve as an absolute glaring counterexample to this narrative, almost a caricature, right? Because, to argue that this man is rich because he's benefiting the rest of us is just increasingly ridiculous, right? I mean, you could have argued at one point that he was doing some good with Tesla, I think, but even there, the stock price has crashed and there's this massive boycott because of his behavior, and it's always been known to be overvalued anyway. But he took Twitter and he's completely changed it, and he's running it into the ground. And he tried the boring tunnel in Las Vegas, if you remember that. That just doesn't work. It was supposed to be like some kind of half car, half subway. Why you wouldn't just have a subway?
But maybe he's just a bad example. If you take Jeff Bezos, for example, and say, there's lots of people, lots of people are working for minimum wage now, and he's hollowed out our high street, but he's, for the benefit of everybody, we can buy stuff a lot easier. Maybe Microsoft, Bill Gates and Microsoft is a better example, because he's created a productivity tool that everybody uses. So, I mean,
as someone who uses Microsoft, I'm not so sure.
But it's better than a quill pen. I agree with it, but it's better than a quill pen, isn't it? And a piece of parchment. Things have moved on. I mean, it has made us more productive.
I think one thing that all of these guys have in common, look, yeah, Bezos, I'd choose Bezos over Musk if you forced me at gunpoint. But one thing that all these guys have in common is that they just want to take control over their corners of the economy. They take control over their own industries, and they tend to squeeze out competitors. Amazon has a long history of doing this. It tends to just price people out and then jack the prices back up once any competitor has gone bust. And similarly, back in the heyday of the kind of open source internet, Gates was really unhappy that he couldn't extract money from it, and he's, through intellectual property mostly, gradually established a monopoly. And now, despite Microsoft being quite an inferior operating system, he does just make a lot of money, and he does a lot of patent trolling as well. He set up numerous ventures that do this. So I just think that the level of control that these individuals have and the laws and systems that enable them are well above and beyond the value from anything they've created. And I do think, we don't see the competitors to Amazon and Microsoft that were squeezed out by this behavior. We don't see what would have happened had antitrust had more teeth and they've been broken up when they should have been.
So, Steve, isn't this all just a question of regulation? Isn't it? Isn't it the state has failed in this, in that they haven't put in the appropriate laws? And of course, we're seeing America go the other way now.
The main failure relates back to not knowing that government should be creating fiat money as part of a well-functioning capitalist economy. That's all the things we're talking about being slashed back. The public health that is now privatised and so on and so forth. That is all because of this ridiculous idea that there's a fiscal crisis of the state. That's enabled those private takeovers. And then what happens, and this is more important, I think, than the Amazon or even Tesla argument, is that when these corporations do take those assets over, they don't do the long-term maintenance the state used to do, because they've got quarterly profit objectives to meet, whereas the state provided it just as part of a functioning system. So, these days, if you want to go sewerage surfing, the UK is your country. Right?
But you wouldn't have
you want to go to, there's plenty of shit there for you to ride on.
But you wouldn't have a state-owned Amazon or a state-owned Microsoft.
That sort of thing, council libraries, they could have evolved into something. But there's always going to be, and this is what is new about our time in capitalism, network effects, where there's no advantage to one telephone. You need two. The same thing, once you've got something like Amazon set up, it's very hard to have a rival, because the economies of scale that exist, the single channel, it's convenience for the buyer. And this, I think, we tend to forget that point, that a lot of convenience for the consumer drives the growth of these huge network-based systems in the meantime. People, for example, they want to go onto Blue Sky talking about Musk. And I think, not another bloody social media. Can't I just post to one? So in that sense, once there's one, it becomes the only one. And then we have to recognise that there's partially the income is coming out of the network effect, not out of the innovation. But this, you socialise.
So you're saying the government should provide that then? Because that is like full-on socialism, isn't it? If you're saying, well, okay, all of these things should be provided
I'm not saying
by the government.
And if you under rights, you say, okay, how much of this is the entrepreneur and how much is the network effect? And if it's the network effect, then you've got to share it to some extent. Now, I haven't noticed Bezos being very good at sharing. Gouging, yes. Sharing, no. Ditto for Apple.
Right. So this is where, Cahal, this is where we get into, and you write about this in the book, where we need more democratization, I guess, of the workplace. So all of these companies, for example, and Germany is the great example, isn't it, where there are workers on boards, and it's the same in many other countries as well, not in the UK. So and we've talked on this podcast about the positive impacts of that in Japan, where actually, the unionization of the board means that workers are there able to actually influence the direction of the company in a positive way, because they're there trying to drive efficiency. And it feels like in your book you're saying, well, this is a big part of the answer.
Yeah, there are a lot of different types of democratization, right? So there's worker democracy, and if you talk about some of these warehouses where Amazon workers work, they're some of the sort of worst conditions that you'll find in a rich countries, at least. But so, you know, worker democracy, workers having a say, not having to meet such stringent targets, and being probably paid more. I think those are things that I'd really like to see. But there's also consumer democracy, right? There's consumer co-ops, which I think are quite a promising way to manage social media. It's funny, I think Jack Dorsey said something to this effect, that he basically thinks that they should be managed in this way. So it's easy to forget that something like Amazon is actually quite a lot of different things. It's quite a lot of different companies. You've got like the warehouses, you've got the logistics network, you've got the advertising wing, you've got the website, you've got credit facilities, right?
And you've got Amazon Web Services, which so many of the world's apps are now sitting on. I mean, it's
yeah, exactly. You've got to use Amazon one way or another. They also own Deliveroo, which we were talking about earlier, right? So it's like, I think, you know, splitting these up and democratizing them probably in different ways, you know, where the place where most of the work is done, I think, should be worker democracy, but perhaps the sort of social media end and the user end, you're talking about consumers actually having a say and using that kind of model. But there are lots of different ways to do this.
I'm still trying to figure out, Steve, how this works, though. So let's take... So Google is a great example, and the European Union, because they're there saying, okay, well, we feel like Google needs to be broken up. Well, so actually, in America, there's antitrust legislation saying that they've got too much control. But Europe has been, you know, going at Google a great deal as well with antitrust legislation. So, but if you break up some of these companies, then they lose some of those benefits you're saying about, you know, the interconnectivity of things.
For in terms of automobiles, anything with 4 wheels or 3 wheels or 2 wheels can go on a road. But when you have a social media system, the proliferation of different social media, ultimately, it's for the consumer. It's easier just to have one. And that's, I think, a large part of what actually happens there. So you can't break them into multiple little ones. And, of course, when we've done that in the past, we've screwed up the engineering. The breakup of Marvell in the USA to multiple regional telecommunication systems still makes telecommunications in the States really clunky compared to other countries which had a more integrated approach.
So what are you saying then? It should be partially state-owned?
You have to recognise the network effect of something. If you're making your money because you've got a network effect, then that's in a sense a public good. Okay, and you have to then say part of the gains of that have to go back to the public in some sense. Of course, that won't happen. You know, we're talking a country run by billionaires these days, so those things aren't going to happen. It's a question of what's it doing to the rest of us that we're not aware of, which is back to your topic, Cahal.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that the rise of billionaires has basically made a lot of people poorer, right? I think through, whether you're talking about through exploitation of workers, especially across the world as well, right? Because this extends like way across the world, or you're talking about the exploitation of consumers. I mean, Amazon may seem convenient, but they have been pulled up a lot of times for showing people different prices, and people don't realize that they're being showed different prices, and they're gouging people, right, even though their prices seem low. So yeah, I do think it has a massive effect on the rest of us, and that's before we even get into the politics of it, right, which you were just alluding to earlier, Steve. But obviously, you know, when they can actually insert themselves into government, then we've got another set of problems entirely.
Well, they also have perfect information, don't they? If everyone's using Amazon, they know, you know, they can break down the demographics. They can say, well, this is the spending pattern. We've got a whole load of information here. We can adjust our pricing accordingly. We know which products are selling well, and we've seen, you know, Amazon saying, well, okay, let's do our version of that and make it slightly cheaper, which is all monopolistic behavior, which somehow doesn't seem to be challenged a great deal, does it? So, I mean, maybe that information, if this is a, you know, public utility, that this information is coming from the public, it should be made available to all other companies as well. Maybe there needs to be an opening out of this sort of data that they're holding.
Yeah, I don't know too much about this, but the sort of democratization of data, right, and us having kind of privacy rights and rights over our data, I think that's something that we could really look at. I don't know about selling it to other businesses, but I don't know. It depends on how you mean, right? But I think if everybody, you know, has protective rights over their own data, and there are certain things that companies just cannot do with it inherently, I think that would be a really good step forward.
I drag us back a bit of history here, because you haven't mentioned anything about your origins, but I know your origin story, so why don't you share it?
My origin story. Okay. So my origin story, Yeah, I skipped over it a bit, but it was that I started studying economics because of the 2008 financial crisis. Basically, I'd started at A level high school just as it began, and then that was what made me want to continue to study it, because it seemed pretty big, and it seemed like people didn't see it coming, and it seemed like people didn't really know what to do about it. So I was like, yeah, economics is pretty important. And I actually took 2 years out though between A levels and university. Now in that time was actually when I discovered Steve's work, and I think I was more on the train of, you know, greedy bankers and so on before that. And fair enough, I'm still on that train to an extent. But I think the stuff that really was looking at some of the ideas behind the economic paradigm that we'd adopted, behind what's called neoliberalism, right? That was stuff that really took aim at the economics profession, and that became very interesting to me. There are a lot of these books released between 2000 and, well, I think it was probably not until 2010 you started to see these appear, and they seemed a bit more reflective than just, you know, looking at what was going on in the Barclays boardroom, you know, in 2008. They were a little bit deeper and a little bit more fundamental. So I started reading people like Steve and Ha-Joon Chang, as well as another good example, David Orrell, economists, and Eve Smith, the author of the blog Naked Capitalism. So all of these, and I just found them really fascinating. And I was like, wow, a lot of these failures lie within the economics profession itself, which kind of gave me even more impetus to study economics, to see what the hell was going on. And that's why I started in 2011 studying at Manchester.
And that led to the was it called Rethinking, or what was the original title for it?
It was post-crash economics at Manchester. Yeah. So they're still around, but there were a lot. The funny thing was about this, right? So a year or two in, and I knew it was going to be like this, but I didn't realize quite how bad it was going to be. There were quite a few of us who were like, this is mad. Like, you know, Greece was on fire, and we were just drawing silly little diagrams. We weren't learning anything about it. It's not an exaggeration to say that, like, a look at BBC News would not have helped me in my degree. Absolutely ridiculous. And so we banded together and we were like, well, why are we just learning all this abstract theory by rote and just learning to do the maths, learning to basically regurgitate things, to be honest, multiple choice tests and all the rest of it. And so that's when we formed post-crash economics. But a lot of students across the world were doing something similar independently. It was really interesting. All of these different organizations popped up, and then we sort of coalesced and gathered together, and then we founded Rethinking Economics, which is actually still a registered charity to this day that still campaigns on improving economics education. And a lot of the local societies are still going. I think it's become more of a global movement. But we got into the newspapers. We were in The Guardian, I think in 2013, 2014. We ended up sort of clashing with our department a bit, and we had some meetings with them, and they made some changes, but not others. But it's still going to this day, right? Yeah. That whole thing.
So why is it, do you think, why are we having this this protected approach to economics, and why are we not having more open discussion? It's not just economists, is it? I mean, it's politicians as well, and politicians are using conventional economics as a weapon against change, and maybe that says it all, actually.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, I'm interested to know what Steve thinks about this, because by my reckoning, that if you take austerity and the view of the economy as being opposed to human aims that I was talking about earlier, if you take all that, I would say it's like politicians have taken the worst bits of economics, right, and then they've kind of used them as a weapon, as you said. And I think there are a lot of mainstream Keynesian economists. Paul Krugman is one that I tend to agree with on most of what he says politics-wise. I have some methodological disagreements with him. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. But these ideas are much more present in undergraduate economics as well. And I think that you've got things like real business cycle theory, which is the kind of core of a lot of these models. And that's like, recessions are caused by voluntary holidays on the part of workers and random shocks to technology. I don't know what that means.
Stuff.
Is that like if this stream went offline, that would be a technology shock? I don't know. But it's just the most ridiculous ideas, and politicians use it as a crutch. And to give, sorry, Steve, I'll let you speak in a second, but one really good example of this was the Reinhardt and Rogoff paper, right? When they said that debt over 90%, public debt over 90% suddenly leads to a slowdown, as we know, based on a spreadsheet error, but cited by George Osborne in the UK and also Paul Ryan in the States, and I think a few other politicians across the globe as justification for austerity.
Yeah, well, you see, the problem is we don't go back and look, do we? So even if it wasn't a spreadsheet error and there was some sort of mathematical model sitting behind it, I mean, it's been shown to be completely wrong.
But it's still stuck. It's still how
the
politicians
spreadsheet error was just one thing.
Again, this just falls into the household analogy that, is about the limits of thinking of most politicians. And rather than saying it's nonsense, the profession strengthens it. But Cahal, here's one comment that I hope you recognise. You might not have heard this one before, but I think you would have. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. It was a poet who said that, exercising occupational licence. Some sage, it may have been I, declared in similar vein, I don't care who writes a nation's laws or crafts its advanced treaties if I can write its economic textbooks. The first lick is the privileged one, impinging on the beginner's tabula rasa at its most impressionable state. Who wrote that?
Paul Samuelson.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Samuelson, who defined neoclassical economics, knows that if you train all the bloody politicians with 1 year of supply and demand curves and all that sort of nonsense, and it is nonsense, they'll come out doing what they're doing collectively, and that undermines the type of society we would otherwise have, which would be a damn sight fairer.
So getting to that more fair society then, Cahal, and you do sort of touch on the answers in your book, but are there any real answers? I mean, what do we do?
I just firmly believe that pursuing massive investment in things which are good for people, it sounds a bit cheesy, but I think we all know what I mean, right? Health, education, and so on. Pursuing massive investment, mostly public, but private investment will come with that because it will crowd in private investment, which is the opposite of the sort of standard argument. I think that is just a way to make the world a much better place, and I don't think it's that. It's nothing new. It's not completely. It's not like some wacky suggestion that I've come up with. It's just something that is actually tried and tested, and I would like to see a lot more of it. I think the world would be a much better place if we'd pursued that.
Big opportunity for Europe, isn't it, if only it would listen, that if it actually spent more right now, and the UK as well, money's leaving America in its droves because they're doing the complete opposite, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm kind of cautiously optimistic about this, and I do wonder if the situation in the USA will cause Europe, not to mention other countries, to get their act together and say, okay, actually, we need to do this ourselves.
What do you reckon, Steve? Is this the dawning of a new age? I mean, it's a big ask, isn't it, for the European Union and the ECB to start saying, do you know what, we should be spending more government money on stuff.
The ECB has tied itself in such ridiculous knots. I think the best way to resolve the treaty would be blow up the buildings and burn all the documents and start all over again. It's
We'd give a 5-minute warning so they can
maybe
get out.
3.
We'll be humane about it.
Yeah, IRA style. Yeah,
but otherwise,
I'll just say that because that's the soundbite that we've taken for this podcast. Look at these guys, these terrorists. We will never get into America.
I've given up. I'm not going to go to America for 4 years. I've decided.
I'm never going back there.
When I put America on my destination, I don't want to find I wake up in El Salvador. So so I'm not going there for 3 or 4 years. But it's just they're crazy. There's no effective way to reform the euro apart from abolishing it, unfortunately, and the Maastricht Treaty and so on. At least the UK and USA and any country that actually produces its own currency can have a change of mind. But they won't do it. I think what's going to happen instead is we'll be confronted with ecological catastrophes completely off the scale of anything anybody's ever contemplated beforehand. And in that situation, you're not going to get the private sector going into mop up the damage. It's going to be the state that does it again. So I think we'll be forced into it in a sort of a war economy fashion.
Well, and the reason why, obviously, climate change is ignored by and large is because it is a political thing, and it depends on who's in power at the time. And so, obviously, we've got climate change denial in the United States at the moment, so it's getting no traction there whatsoever. Quite the opposite. But I mean, doesn't that raise the issue generally? I mean, if the idea is, well, we need to spend more, we need to create stuff that is good for people, to create an economy that everyone is happy to live in, rather than one which is creating a lot of misery. That's still a political decision, and I'm not advocating that we get rid of democracy, but isn't part of the problem. You can go down one direction, you have a change of power, and everything just gets, as we've seen, everything just gets thrown out the window.
Yeah, completely trashed. I mean, we don't really have effective democracy. I think we have a popularity contest between narcissists with differing ideologies. That's what passes for politics in the West. Again, I think it's making obvious that the Chinese situation, even though they talk about a one-party state, it's a one-party state of engineers making engineering decisions rather than two bunches of ideologues trashing each other and flip-flopping from policy and going nowhere. So I think it isn't just a problem of economics, it's a problem of our political system as well.
But is it, and we'll let you have the last word, is it more, though, to do with democracy at a lower level? Because, again, you talk about this, Cahal, in the book, about, is the democracy actually company worker boards? Do we have more democratization in central banks, for example? Do we have people involved more in decision making at a lower level where their expertise might actually add something and place it beyond the influence of party politics at a higher level?
Yeah, I mean, I think democracy is much more effective at a level where people are connected to the outcomes of their decisions, right? Where people know about things. Workers know the most about their jobs, right? And they are the most affected by the decisions made, right? So if you compare that to national politics, where people just don't really understand, I mean, I've been studying economics for 15 years. I don't think I fully understand every issue in the economy at a national level. It's too complicated, and that's before you even get into vested interests and the popularity contest between narcissists. It can be extremely dysfunctional, and I do believe that democracy, or what I call demos in the book, is something which actually is more effective at a local level and at a level that matters to people.
Well, the book is called Why We Are Getting Poorer. I like this. For those people who are listening and not watching, Carl's got a poster behind saying, "Read more, you idiot." And you can start by reading this book, Why We're Getting Poorer. It's published by HarperCollins. Cahal, it's been great having you on the podcast. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.